15 and 20 of us here.
Okay. You heard the Zoom lady said we're being recorded, so don't say anything you don't want recorded for posterity.
Watch your language, in other words.
Yes, and which is always a good idea, right? You don't really
Absolutely.
want to, and you have to assume that you're always being recorded, right, in this society.
Permanent record, right? Everything's on our
Yeah.
permanent record.
And it may be replayed on some radio show in 10 years. You can be in big trouble. So we are in the book of Numbers, and I have the Jewish Study Bible, which is good if you want to get a 1-volume Tanakh. Side, did you have a comment?
Yeah, before the meeting gets started, I'd like to make a comment, if I may.
Sure.
The past 4th of July weekend, the Wall Street Journal had an article about the painting that Trumbull made called the Declaration of Independence. I'm sure everybody's familiar with it. And the article discussed how the painter pointed out the important figures in the painting. For example, that Thomas Jefferson wore a red vest, and Adams, the painter did Adams so that most of his body was indicated on the painting, as compared to all the other signers of the Declaration, whose head and face only appear. So this is what I'd like to read. Though Adams and Jefferson were originally close friends, their philosophical and political differences came to the fore when the French Revolution began in 1789. Jefferson praised it as the natural successor to the American Revolution, saying that rather than it should have failed, I would have seen half the earth desolate. Adams, in contrast, was shocked by the way that France rejected religious teaching, and he predicted the tyranny to come. There a possibility, he reflected, that the government of nations may fall into the hands of men who teach the most disconsolate of all creeds, that men are but fireflies, and that this all is without a father. Is this the way to make man, as men, an object of respect? For Adam's only faith provided a moral guarantee
Not my eyeglasses, I can't see.
human equality,
I don't know.
cherished by the Enlightenment philosophy. While Adam was not an Orthodox Christian, he revered the
Is
pure
it him or someone else? Right.
and argued that our
Stop talking.
Constitution was made only for moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Jefferson scored.
Okay, let's begin.
Sai has just been muted, so we can't hear him right now.
Side, we can't hear you, but we want to try to stick on topic if possible. Side, do you want to unmute and finish up?
Let it go now. That's all right.
Very interesting topic, but definitely off topic. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I was just saying that you may want to have a Tanakh, something like this. The Jewish Study Bible is a good one, and it covers the entire Hebrew Bible, not just the Torah. We are in the book of Numbers, basically chapter 35. This is part of a double parsha, which is Matot, Maseh. So it's two parshas combined, correct? And we're looking at basically chapter 35, and we're looking at one topic, which is the idea of the cities of refuge. Is there any quick comments or questions about that specifically? So we're on page 89 of the Harvey Field, and the topic is Perek Cities of Refuge, Justice for Unintentional Homicide. And so, oh, there's Ray. So, and there's Leah. Okay. So the question is, what is unintentional homicide? We're talking here about something very tragic happening and somebody dies. What are the circumstances that might be, envisioned in this particular scenario? Bernie or Lorraine or Marcia?
Well, in modern times, it could be running someone over with a car.
Okay, good. So you're driving, you're texting, let's say you're texting or you're talking on the phone or you're drinking alcohol or you're watching videos or something like that and you're driving and you hit somebody, they're in their car, they're in their golf cart, they're walking across the street and you kill them. Maybe not immediately, maybe they're in the hospital for a week, but in any case, they die. That's manslaughter, perhaps.
What about if a doctor makes a mistake in the operating room? He had a bad night.
Okay, so if the doctor just makes a mistake because he doesn't know which one, nobody knows, it's an art, not a science, and somebody dies, that's just accidental death. But what if he was drinking the night before and he's still got blood alcohol level too high, or he didn't do the prep work that he was supposed to do? He's supposed to, you read all the time where they're supposed to chop off the left leg and they chop off the right leg because they didn't look, they didn't check the charts and stuff like that. So doctor kills somebody because of negligence. A driver kills somebody because of distraction, unnecessary distraction. Lael or Ray, another example. Yes, Marcia.
Well, if you, a crazy example, like if you threw something off a bridge and it hit somebody who was walking on the bottom, you actually caused their death, but you didn't intend.
I read about exactly that case a few months ago. Some kids threw a big stone, like one of those construction things off of a bridge. It hit a car, went through the windshield, killed the driver. They weren't trying to kill somebody, but when you throw heavy things off of a bridge and there's cars underneath, if something happens, you are certain. But that seems worse than being distracted by texting. I don't know, but you can see there's different gradients here. What about a duel? Who was the famous founding father who was killed in a duel?
Hamilton.
Hamilton.
Yeah.
Hamilton.
Hamilton.
So Alexander Hamilton, who was raised in a Jewish day school in the Caribbean island of Nevis, and was considered one of the founders of our economic system, got into a fight with, what was the name of the guy that killed him?
Aaron Burr.
Okay, who otherwise would not be well known, and they had a duel. Now, we don't do that today, do we?
Quiet.
When did that, it'd be interesting when that became illegal. But in those days, it was perfectly legal and Burr was not prosecuted because Hamilton had consented to the duel. So it was considered, you know, a legal thing. So here we have all these cases. Now, in some of these cases, it is seen that there needs to be protection for the person who kills the person. Why? Why would you want to protect the killer?
Well, there are differences between premeditated murder, and let's say a crime of passion.
Okay, so but that doesn't like the rabbi. She takes him out to lunch. She drops a little arsenic in his coffee.
Not this rabbi. No.
Right. I'm glad. I can't tell you how much better I'm going to sleep knowing that. But you know, there could be other people, not Babette, but somebody else that I haven't gotten along with so well, and they say, "Rabbi, let's have coffee." I go to coffee. The coffee's not Starbucks. It doesn't taste very good. And then an hour later, my stomach starts to hurt, and before you know it, no more rabbi. So that's murder, right? That's absolute murder, and we're not going to protect somebody who does that. Correct? Lorraine, you have to unmute. Lorraine wants to invite me to coffee.
Okay, that's murder. That's murder with the intent to kill. That was not accidental. They didn't
Okay.
just have arsenic sitting on the table and you took it instead of sugar. This was done purposely. I think
Okay,
that's different.
So there's now another case is Lorraine is trying to get rid of rats. She's got rats in her house and she's got arsenic lying around. I come over for coffee and she's in the other room, and I don't want to wait for the sugar because I'm very eager to drink the coffee. So I take what I think is sugar and I pour some arsenic into my own coffee. She wasn't.
That's right.
So then when Lorraine comes back, she says, "What did you do?" And she calls an ambulance immediately, but it's too late. Then is that even anything? I mean, I did it myself, Lorraine. It was just a complete fluke that the arsenic was on the table.
I don't think so.
Okay. Ham and then side.
I like the fact in this Parsha that you had a procedure when this happens, and there is an involuntary thing. I like the fact that they thought, okay, well, we have a procedure now. Instead of this festering, we have a procedure on what we're going to do with the person who accidentally caused his death. And it just seems like I like the fact that they took that approach.
Marcia and then Cy.
Was this only in cases of involuntary homicide, or did it cover other situations also? We have sanctuary cities, but it covers immigration problems too.
Well, all of the Israelites were illegal immigrants.
Well, that's true, but I didn't know if there could be other, violations of the law that might have been covered. I didn't know if it was just the homicide.
And you can take out your Tanakh and read chapter 35 and see whether there are any other cases covered. And I think you'll find that it does not appear. This appears to be specifically dealing with involuntary manslaughter. Cy.
Well, suppose the Israelis are at war and an enemy soldier approaches one of our men from behind. You're standing there watching him, and he's ready to kill our soldier, but you don't warn him. You don't warn him, and he gets killed. What kind of responsibility is that?
It sounds like a slightly lower degree. but it's getting there. Any death that results from negligence or sins of omission, something like that would seem to potentially fall in this category. Jennifer, Bernie, or Pam, comment? Or Riva? Yes, Riva or
Yeah,
Jennifer?
one of the things I like about this discussion is that there's degrees of guilt and it's quite nuanced. And so there's, on one side, there's a total innocence, and on the other side, there's total guilt by intent. There's the intent to do no harm, but something terrible happens. On the other hand, there's intent, but there's also a nuance, and that's sort of the degree of guilt, the degree of responsibility, and the degree of intention. And I like that aspect of it.
And I guess the key thing here is that the person is not really responsible because there was no intent. And on the other hand, the family of the dead person may still feel that this person is directly responsible, and they want
Retribution.
Yeah.
right. And it's interesting, Riva used the word retribution. What other word might you use?
Justice.
Justice.
And what other word might you use? A third word?
Revenge.
So these three words all have very different implications, right? Retribution, justice, or revenge. Depending on which of the three you use, you get a very different amount of sympathy for the people that want this. Everybody feels that a family deserves justice, right? But do they have a right for revenge? Fewer of us would say yes. So you could frame this situation very differently, and you get different results. And you still see in places like Iraq and Syria that there still are a lot of family feuds, right? I mean, isn't there a TV show here, Family Feud?
But I was more thinking about Israel and her neighbors.
On a national level.
Absolutely.
But this chapter 35 seems to be focused primarily or exclusively on the individual and specifically the family level, right? My uncle was run down by your nephew, and I want to run down your nephew because he ran down my uncle, and so that'll fair and square, right? Yes, Lorraine.
Yeah, bringing this more current, what about what happened in Florida with that building? The board members knew that the building was in ill repair and needed to be fixed, and yet they were dragging their tails, and money was the thing that was talking the most. And all those people died, including many of the board members, I'm sure. So how does guilt fit into that? And I'm sure families want to have retribution, and I'm sure there will be major lawsuits.
Oh, well, yeah, this is this is a lower level of culpability. The board members were not driving while texting. They were meeting every month and fighting. And they were fighting over money, right? Because a one-bedroom apartment was going to get assessed at least $80,000 to fix these problems. And a bigger apartment was going to be assessed 200 and something thousand. This is just for repairs. This is what we would normally associate with buying such a unit. So they were being assessed, the money was huge. So there was a lot of fighting, and we'll probably learn more. But how culpable you know, are these people? I mean, that's one of the reasons when the board is asked about security, they almost always right away, everybody says, yes, we need security, let's hire a guard, etc. Because you don't want to be in a situation where you said, oh, we don't need a guard, nothing's going to happen. And then somebody, comes into the synagogue and starts shooting. So you'd rather be more on record as being more concerned than less concerned. So, but what are you going to do? You're going to say, one of these board members may say, well, I was just saying we needed another study, or I was saying we could get a cheaper contractor that would be just as good. Are they responsible directly or indirectly for these deaths? I mean, I don't know. Lorraine, back to you.
I don't know either. Having sat on many boards, I had never thought beyond the events that were happening right there. And now I hear this and I go, oh my God, I should never have been there. That's quite a responsibility.
Yeah. Sai?
I think it's interesting that in the reading, it seems that Moses is making all these decisions. And that goes a little beyond my thinking. Wasn't there any groups in there that were putting all this together?
Oh, very good. Who makes these decisions? So, the Israelites did not really have democracy as we understood it. And, how much of this is Moses, right? We give a lot of credit to Moses, but as we're, and you'll see the new, we just started our new board, July 1st. And you're going to see that the new board is much more focused on building committees and achieving consensus and, trying to reach out to a larger number of members and getting their feedback and getting their involvement. And in theory, this is good. But sometimes it's easier, quicker, and more efficient to just say, let the leader or the president or the chair make the decision and just do it. Otherwise you can get what is the expression, death by committee. So it's a hard thing. Now, in the case of the Florida situation, you have a lot of people died in the most horrible way. And there's a certain sense of somebody must get fault. The builder, who I believe is a Jewish guy from Canada, is dead. This is a building that was built more than 40 years ago. But somebody substituted inferior metal for the original plans had more metal rods, and the actual building appears to have less. If they can find who made that substitution, you can blame them. But did they have any idea that that would result in the building crumbling?
No,
No. So,
no.
So this is an even more indirect case of non-deliberate, non-intentional manslaughter, where people die as a result of your actions, but you did not intend that to happen. And I think we all understand that if you do intend it to happen, that's murder, maybe not first degree, but second or third degree murder. And that's not covered by these cities of refuge. Marcia.
I had built a couple of swimming pools in California on my properties, and every step of the way, I had the city out looking to make sure that the rebar was laid properly, the cement was put in properly, everything had to be examined. And so there's those people, I don't know if city workers have some sort of immunity, but those people are also responsible. They should have seen that there were fewer rebars in that building than there should have been and what they were made out of. So there's a large spread to the responsibility. And in that particular case, but I can see where a city like this would be. I mean, would you want to live in a city where all these unintentional murders lived? Think about it.
Well, and it's interesting because you know that the Israelites settled to the west of the Jordan River and also to the east of the Jordan River. And there were equal numbers of cities of refuge on the west and the east, but the population in the west was much greater. So the question that is asked is, why were there equal numbers of refuge cities? And the answer was that the murder rate, or the accidental manslaughter rate, was much higher on the eastern side. It was basically the wild, wild east. So that, I think, is an interesting fact as well. That and today, of course, the east of the Jordan River is Jordan. It's no longer Israel, but it was, at least according to the Torah, settled by the Israelites in the biblical times. Okay, let's start reading. Who'd like to read? We're at the bottom of page 89 in the bottom right-hand corner. Marcia.
Okay. Parsha must say, presents a revolutionary approach to providing justice for those who have committed involuntary manslaughter, meaning they have unintentionally murdered another person.
Stop. Can you unintentionally murder another person? Shouldn't the words be unintentionally cause the death?
Yeah, I think so.
So murder implies some degree of intent.
Yep.
And so Harvey
That's
feels
just the author, though.
word here. What?
That's the author saying that.
Yes, so
Yeah.
he's wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
It suggests that in such accidents, guilty parties may escape avenging relatives by going immediately to one of the 6 Ariai Miklat, or cities of asylum. Within
Right.
those, yep.
Eklad is the Hebrew word for asylum, and Ir means city, and plural of Ir is Are. So cities of refuge or cities of asylum.
Within those cities, 3 of which are located in the land of Israel: Hebron, Shechem, and Kedesh, and 3 east of the Jordan River, Bezer, Ramoth, and Golan. Those who have committed involuntary manslaughter are to find safety and justice from those seeking to avenge the death of their loved ones. How did those Arei Miklat, or cities of asylum, function? The Torah and rabbinic law provide us with some answers. During the biblical period, relatives of murder victims, whether premeditated or unintentional, had the right to find and execute those who were guilty of killing their loved ones. Those whose crime was committed by accident, however, had the right to save themselves from the revenge of families by going immediately to one of the 6 cities of asylum. All roads leading to these cities had to be clearly marked with signs pointing the way. In addition, the roads were to be straight, level, and in good condition. No obstacle was to stand in the way of those seeking asylum.
Okay, so give me the scenario here. Pam, Ray, or Lael. What could happen? Or Babette, or Weaver, or Steve? Bernie. You
Can't hear
muted.
you.
You muted yourself. There you
One of 2 things could happen. Either they could get to the city safely, or they could get caught by the relatives on the way. But as I see the whole thing about making the road easy to travel was making it easier for the people to escape.
Okay. And so this is a case where somebody was texting and driving and they run somebody over. Does that sound like such a case?
No, that's been so publicized. Don't do this, this could happen. I wouldn't consider that a situation like that.
So,
How about 10 years ago?
maybe 10 years ago.
all right, so let's go back into the biblical period. I'm throwing rocks at birds, and I accidentally throw a rock at a bird and hit a person, kill him. It's
Yeah.
completely accidental, but maybe I shouldn't have been throwing rocks in that area, but I didn't think there was anyone around, something like that. The
I guess it
relative,
was an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth situation in that, at that time, right?
the relatives want to find me and kill me because I killed their grandfather. So, and according to biblical law, they have that right, but I also have the right to run away to one of these 6 cities. Does that sound reasonable? I mean, do you support this whole concept of having these cities of refuge? Bernie?
I support that concept because of the other existing condition where the family of the victim is allowed to pursue and kill the perpetrator. If that were not the case, if they were only trying to protect against hotheads, then I would say no for the cities. Just let the justice system take its course.
So wouldn't it be better to prohibit families from taking revenge and handle it that way?
Absolutely, because they may be going after the wrong person.
Or they may be going after a person who really, it was just a complete accident. I mean, you know, things can happen where it's not really your fault. I mean, to give you another example, what if you're driving, you're paying attention, you're not drunk, you're not texting, and somebody just runs out into the street suddenly and you can't brake? You weren't speeding, you know, you weren't doing anything wrong. They just bolted out in the middle of the street suddenly and right in front of your car, and you hit them, you killed them. But, you know, you didn't do anything wrong at all. Aside.
Yeah, I'm curious as to whether or not other societies at the same time had similar rules and regulations. And that's where the Israelites were getting some of the rules. I mean, I can't believe that one day this is all made up. I just can't believe that.
Yeah,
It's
good
gotta
question.
come from other sources, other countries, other peoples all over, you know, where they lived, or must have had rules and regulations that was somewhat similar.
Pam and then Marcia.
I think that's a great question, Cy, because I'm thinking we can't be the first ones that came up with this. And there must have been other civilizations this is built on.
That's right.
And there's
Uh,
a code of-
And part of the problem is I have a lot of Torah commentaries in English and Hebrew, and really none of them address that there are books, of course, about the ancient Near East, but they're not usually biblical commentaries. So you've got to really go a little bit further afield to learn about that. And that's really a great point. And we can probably assume that there were similar regulations elsewhere, but whether the Torah, you know, changes them in some way, I don't know. Marcia and then Lael and then Reva.
I'm thinking that's true of most of the laws in Israel. They come from Babylonia, the Code of Hammurabi, and or whatever it was, and Egypt and other places that had civilized civilization, and they had to have some kind of rule. And a lot of the Israeli laws come from that, not just this.
What's Confucius say?
You should say yes.
Lael and then Reva.
Well, I always hear that almost everybody that's in jail said, I didn't do it. How do these sanctuary cities know which ones were actually unintentional and which ones were actually done intentionally? They just let everybody in. I got to come in because I'm trying to save my own life.
And one of the commentaries points out that immediately became a big problem, that a lot of people that had done something intentionally, of course, what's the option A is to say I didn't do it at all. But option B, if you have witnesses or if that's just not seen as very likely to be believed, is to say I did it, but it was completely accidental. You know, I didn't put the arsenic in the coffee on purpose. I thought it was sugar. So, you know, how do you prove what was deliberate and what was not deliberate? Riva, and then Ray, and then Bernie.
From a point of Fields, the first sentence, the first paragraph that introduces this parak says that the parak presents a revolutionary approach to providing justice for those who have committed involuntary manslaughter, meaning that they have unintentionally caused the death of another person. So according to Fields, this was a revolutionary approach to this issue. And but we don't see any attribution for that information. And then second, a lot of this is from the point of view of the perpetrator, the one who caused either intentionally or unintentionally the death of somebody else.
Right, right. So it's unusual because normally in our society, you would tend to be sympathetic with the victim or the victim's family, right? Lorraine was just saying how, you know, all those poor people that were crushed in that building collapse, you don't hear them talking about how the builder was trying to, you know, do whatever, or the board was trying to do whatever. The victim is the front and center. Here, it's the perpetrators who we're worried about. Bernie, and then Ray.
I think Ray was first.
Ray, and then Bernie.
Thank you. I find it difficult to believe that this was something that was in the time when Moses was commanding everybody for 40 years, because Moses never entered into the actual Israelite community, where they settled, the promised land. I am impressed that this did come up and was actually a way of handling it. Immediately in the next paragraph, we read that the killer, if in quotes, must go before the elders and appear before 2 courts. So there is a way of the community elders deciding on this. But I can't see that these cities were indicated by Moses. It had to be done after, and it might have been done under Joshua. I think it's remarkable that it was done, but I don't think this book is saying an absolute when it says that Moses perpetrated this. I do believe that something of this sort must have happened in the 40 years, and that pronouncements were made by Moses, and therefore it was taken seriously, and all of this mechanism was provided once the Israelites were in the promised land. I just wanted to point that out.
And I think we don't know to what degree this was laws that were actually passed at a time when you could implement it, or whether this is some writing theory about what you'd like to. I can write a bunch of laws for Sun City, Arizona, and put them on my computer, And in 100 years, they may find them and say, this is what they did in Sun City, when actually they never got any further than my computer. So whether these are practical laws that were implemented or theoretical things that were created either ahead of time or later, looking backwards, we don't really know. Now, some scholars may have ideas on this, but at the moment, we're just kind of dealing with different possibilities. Who was next?
Bernie.
Bernie,
Bernie.
and then Marcia, then we'll read on.
You raised the question a few minutes ago about how do you know whether these people going to the sanctuary cities are telling the truth? Well, according to the text, they did the same thing that we would do today, is that the prosecution and defense would present their case, and the jury or the judge, whichever it may be, would make the decision.
So what if
So they had a trial.
What
Right.
if they go to one of these cities and it's decided that they did it intentionally, then they get thrown out of the city?
No,
Yeah.
he gets killed.
Yeah, they put to death. It's the
Oh,
next
boy.
paragraph.
Okay, wow. Okay, Marcia, and then Cy, and then we're going on.
I think that in going on is what we should be doing, because in scanning the next paragraph, it makes a lot of things a lot clearer. Okay.
Cy? Cy?
Oh, I'm curious as to how many people, how many Israelites were there at this particular time under the auspices of Moses? You know, does anybody have any idea? What are we talking about?
Just
We've talked about this a little bit. You know, the numbers in the Bible suggest more than 2 million. The numbers that, scholars think could have been sustained in the desert is much, much smaller. So we have no idea. But once the Israelites enter into the land of Israel, we're presuming that there's several 100,000 at least.
Okay, the reason I'm bringing this up, it seems to me that based, and I agree with you, on a few 100,000, we've got so many rules and regulations for killing and handling people. This is way out of proportion. You know, there's more of this stuff happening in Chicago than what I would assume going on in the desert. I mean, it's way out of proportion, the concern about murders for 400,000 people.
Well, all right. I can't argue with that. Let's read on. Who'd like to read? Upon arrival.
Want me to keep going,
Sure.
or is somebody else reading?
Now
Upon arrival, wait a second. I lost it. Let somebody else start here, because I lost the page. Oh, here it is. Upon arrival at the city gate, unintentional murderers presented themselves to elders who offered hospitality. Once arrested, they were taken to a court where it was determined whether they were guilty of premeditated murder or involuntary manslaughter. If judged guilty of premeditated murder, they were put to death. If guilty of unintentional homicide, they were allowed to live rent and tax-free in the refugee city during the lifetime of the incumbent high priest. So you had to pick a young high priest. After the death of the high priest, they could return to their home cities without fearing harm from avengers. Modern commentator Rabbi W. Gunther Plaut speculates that the institutionalization of such asylum may be the earliest of its kind, and points out that the distinguishing features of the biblical provisions are the restriction of asylum to the unintentional slayer and the connection of the institution with the death of the high priest. Plaut claims that the notion of the cities of asylum arose out of the need to end family feuds by taking the process of law out of the hands of private individuals and emphasizing the role of public law enforcement. For Plout, the RI Mikvot serve 3 different purposes. They are meant to protect unintentional murders from the passion of avengers, to punish them, and to contain and isolate the sin that has been committed. He suggests that the isolation of sin is the most important, explaining that the killing of a human being, though it occurred without evil intent, was a moral injury to the total community, because the people of Israel have a special God relationship that was founded on zealous regard for the sanctity of life.
Okay, and this, as you know, Rabbi Gunther Plaut was a German refugee. He was one of 6 German rabbinical students who were admitted temporarily to the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati in 1938, I believe. And they were just supposed to stay for a year or so until things calmed down in Germany. And of course, things did not calm down in Germany, so they stayed. And he became the most prominent of the 6. And he wrote, or he edited the 1-volume, the Torah commentary that is used in Reformed temples. I don't really like it. But it's been redone as a 2nd edition, and we have, I think, the first editions in the temple. So Cloud says that there are 3 reasons for this process or this procedure. What are the 3 purposes?
Protection from the avenging
Protection of
family.
who? Protection of who?
Protection of the individual in the city from the avenging family.
So protection of the person that caused the death, number 1. Number 2.
I always thought that was it.
There are 3 reasons Plaut gives for this whole thing. Number 1 is to protect the person who accidentally caused the death.
Oh, to contain and isolate the sin that has been committed, which I don't understand.
Okay. And number 3 or
And
number 2?
punish the guilty.
It's to end
But I
the
think
feuds.
they're not guilty. So I'm confused by number
Yes,
2.
right, yeah,
Explain.
I didn't explain that.
So are we saying that even though they're not guilty of murder, they're guilty of something and they should still be punished by making the move? That's a form of punishment?
A tax and rent free too.
So it's not really much of not much of a punishment if they get rent free. I mean, if you get rent free, would you move even if you don't kill somebody accidentally?
I
You're
guess
isolated from your family and loved
yeah,
ones.
that's what I was gonna say, yeah. Yeah.
And your career is stopped midway, and you're completely separated from your children. This is in time before they had Spirit Airlines, where you could fly from here to
Right.
Denver for $39. So you wouldn't see your family, barely sigh.
I was wondering how suicide would be contemplated. What would they consider suicide to be?
Well, that's a different question. So that's here we're talking about unintentional manslaughter. Suicide, since you're killing yourself, there wouldn't be any other, nobody's going to want revenge because you killed yourself. So your own tribe would not attack themselves. So it wouldn't really come up in this context.
How about if you had the opportunity to prevent the suicide and didn't do it?
Ah,
Then you got another problem.
You're nitpicking.
well, I guess Skinny wanted to come say hello.
Hey, dog.
Hi, Skinny.
So I'm not really sure it would be directly relevant in this case. But you could see how you could move from involuntary manslaughter over to suicide. It wouldn't be that far of a stretch. But let me get back to these three reasons that Plout said for this whole procedure. Number one is to protect the person who caused the death. Number two is to punish them. Even if not severely, they still have to pick up and leave their home and their friends and their career and their families and go to one of these 6 cities. And finally, number three, which is maybe the most important, is to isolate the sin. So it is a sin. Do we agree on that? So it is a wrongdoing. If I'm throwing rocks at birds and I accidentally hit somebody and kill them, it's not deliberate, but it's still something, it's a stigmatic act.
Thou shalt not kill.
But do they ever?
Who said that, Babette?
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's the 10 Commandments, right, includes the lo tirtzach, and it depends how you translate lirtzoach. Most Jewish commentaries translate it as murder. Therefore, killing is not one of the 10 Commandments. So, for example, if you kill somebody who's coming at you with a knife or in a war, that's not counted. But if you translate that commandment as do not kill, as Babette did, then it would be. So then, translation becomes very important. Pam and then Marcia.
Muted, Pam.
Plout's thing is that the third thing is containment is basically negligence, and negligence is punishable at a different degree, but negligence has to be assessed and go from there.
All right, so if I build a building that's deliberately intended to fall down in 10 years or 40 years, that's malicious and conscious with premeditation. If I build a building that I do not intend to fall down, but I make it really pretty frail, then that's much less culpable, but I still have some degree, maybe a heavy degree of responsibility for what might happen. Babette, Steve, and Marcia.
Well, to give an example of what's going on these days is that Chinese steel is much cheaper than that produced in America. And it's cheaper because it's less. It's not as sturdy. So
But if I want to use Chinese steel and I put a little extra in, and the engineers, I consult Dave Katz Associates, and Dave tells me that, okay, with the extra 30% Chinese steel, the building should be really, really sturdy. Then I've saved money and I've covered the safety angle, correct?
Yeah, but why isn't it as good? Will it not hold up?
Oh, well, then I have to follow what the engineers tell me, right?
That's what I was saying about the city inspections and the following, the codes of the city, building codes.
Okay, Steve.
Well, you also need to take into consideration the guilt factor. This person that caused the accident still is going to have that guilt factor the rest of their lives. So they're still going to, isolation, whether it be in a city known for refugees, as opposed to a city that's not, you're still going to have that guilt.
And some people carry that guilt much more than other people, right? Now, there was a case a few years ago where this girl she was it was kind of her boyfriend, although she'd only met him a few times and he lived in a different state. And he said, I'm going to kill myself. Do you remember this case?
Oh,
And
yeah.
she urged him to do it. She said, don't be a wimp. And he got out of the truck where he was gassing himself. And she says, don't be a wimp, get back in there and finish the job. And so then he did, and he died, and they put her on trial. And in the end, I don't think she got very much. She was put in prison, I think, for a year or something, I think. And now you'd like to believe that she's going to walk around the rest of her life feeling guilty, but somehow I don't know if that's the case. I think somebody that would do something like that may very well feel I got away with it, and tough luck to that guy. But I and there was a girl that it came out she'd murdered her mother, and she was like 15, and they put her in a juvenile detention till she was 18, and then she was admitted to Harvard. And when it came out, without she it's like the joke, right? The kid kills his parents, and then he appears before the judge and he says, "Judge, have mercy. After all, I'm an orphan."
Right.
So when it came out she'd murdered her parents, Harvard changed their mind, and they rescinded the offer, and then but Tufts still took her.
Yeah, but what about Dr. Kevorkian that assisted suicide?
Oh, yes. And we're Riva and Rochelle and I are in the very initial stages of planning a discussion group that'll start hopefully in September, October, about this whole issue of assisted dying and all of the things related to that. So you can look forward to that. And yeah, that's a huge issue. Dr. Kevorkian, the original idea was he was going to help people who were in terrible pain and at the very end of their lives, but he got very sloppy, and toward the end he started accepting everybody. And some of the people that he helped kill themselves were not necessarily dying. They were not necessarily in hopeless situations. And that was kind of the working assumption that, so it gets very complicated very quickly. Yes. Steve, Riva.
Yeah, when I saw that there's 3 different purposes, I struggled to count to 3 in this paragraph to see what the 3 really were. And the first one is clearly to protect unintentional murderers from the passion of avengers. And then the second one is to contain and isolate the sin that has been committed. And then I looked around and I thought perhaps it's with reference to a moral injury to the total community. And that is, how does a sin by an individual relate to the community? And then it says, because of a special relationship that was founded on this zealous regard for the sanctity of every life. So I thought you can, with some stretch, you can kind of count to 3, that the third issue is the relationship between the community and God, and between this whole issue and the community.
And is there some responsibility, let's say in a synagogue community, to watch out who becomes part of this community? So, I mean, I'll give you a rather unusual case. When I was a student rabbi in Australia, I heard that several years earlier, a woman from New Zealand had joined the temple, and her mother was German and had emigrated after World War II to New Zealand. This woman, the daughter, had always been interested in Judaism, and she converted to Judaism, and she married a Jewish guy who was really not interested in Judaism. And they became members of the temple, and the woman started attending Torah study. This is about 10 years before I was there. She brought her mother with her because her mother lived with them. One day at Torah study, the mother says, "I'm so proud of my daughter. When I was a young girl in Germany in Hitler Youth, I never imagined that my daughter would one day be one of the shining lights of Temple Shalom's Torah study. Another couple in the temple took affront to that and said, we definitely want to throw out the mother. We don't want her ever gracing the doors of our temple. She was in Hitler Youth. We'd like the daughter to get lost, but we may or may not be able to do that because, whether the idea that guilt passes down to children and grandchildren is not clearly accepted by everybody. But we definitely want the mother out, mother did not convert to Judaism and is a former Hitler Youth person. So there was no rabbi there. So eventually they had to get the Reform rabbis of Sydney and Melbourne to fly up for several days to mediate the whole process. In the end, they ruled in favor of the daughter and the mother. And they said the mother didn't do anything wrong. Hitler Youth was a obligatory youth program for every German kid. And the mother's clearly proud, and she has no moral stigma here, and so she can attend. So the couple that had objected resigned from the temple, and that was the end of it. But do we have a responsibility when I or the religious practice committee decide who's going to bless the Torah on a Friday night? Does that person have to be above moral taint? If it turns out that they were, when I was in high school, one of my friend's parents had been convicted of tax fraud and had served a brief time in prison. Should such a person be permanently ineligible to bless the Torah or be on the board or be honored in some way? Pam, Cy, Bonnie, Lorraine, who would ever like to speak? Pam.
Was the friend's last name Madoff?
Well, that's Madoff, and Madoff, of course, did what he did intentionally. Is there a lower degree of culpability if it's a moral taint that was not quite as
Read the
deliberate?
Bible, please.
What?
Steve, Marcia, Bernie, comments. Moral taints on communities. Bernie and Marcia.
That's a tough one. I was on the board when we had different things going on, at different times in this temple. But this is not murder. They're talking murder, and they're talking about avenging and punishing and containing the sin. So that's what the third one was, Reva. It wasn't the next sentence about morality. But I mean, what would you do if Madoff came, got somehow lived? Oh, stop it. What would you do if Madoff decided to apply for membership and wanted an aliyah? Do you deny him the aliyah? Do you deny him membership? He's still a Jew. I mean, he says, I'm sorry, and then he comes in. It's a difficult problem,
Well, I was talking to a congregant who moved here from Chicago, and
I was calling about a property you own.
You won't even turn off.
Selling it because
I'm sorry.
No problem. And she was saying her temple in Chicago had gone out of business because, among other things, the rabbi had stolen a lot of money. So I said, well, how do I do that? There's all sorts of moral dilemmas and then we looked up the Central Conference of American Rabbis has a list on their webpage of rabbis who've been sanction for unethical behavior. Yes, Marcia,
Can't hear
You're-
you, Marcia.
you're muted.
Muted myself with all that stupid phone thing. When I lived in San Diego, one of the rabbi at the conservative temple in La Jolla was having an affair with his assistant, I think it was.
Oh,
And
yes, I
he
know
winds
that.
up getting fired. He stays on because everybody
Yeah.
liked him. I mean, you could go make the judgments. I mean, it's not right, you know?
Well, these things can happen. So yes, Bernie.
I don't remember whose Bible it's in, but let he who is without sin cast the first stone. So I think that people can be redeemed, especially people who do something unintentionally wrong or doing something wrong unintentionally.
So you don't think, so when people apply to a temple, they shouldn't have a question on there, have you committed any ethical lapses, either deliberately or undeliberately, that we should be aware of?
No, of course
Right.
not.
We can't, I mean, do we scrutinize their criminal background when they put in an application?
Well, according to what Cloud suggests, that seems to be the direction that necessarily, you don't want to necessarily keep people out of everything, but that having people that there's some sort of ethical taint to doing bad things, even if unintentionally.
Yeah, but sociopaths are not welcome.
But we don't make any effort to screen them out as
Right.
well.
Well, Murdoch, he was a sociopath.
Madoff, you mean?
Madoff, he was a sociopath.
It's probably
Yeah.
always
So
Murdoch.
what distinguished him from 100 other people is the scale of his crime, right? But most people like him might do little things. They might be just as much a sociopath, but they're not able, or they're for whatever, they don't scam millions and millions and almost billions of dollars from people.
Mostly Jews too.
Right. So it's the scale that's shocking, but the mentality is probably similar to many people who do things like that on a much, much smaller scale. Okay, let's keep reading a little bit. Well, the next paragraph talks about Santa Rena. I've mentioned this a couple times, but in case having had a June vacation, you probably don't remember. The Santa Rena is the most famous Yiddish commentary on the Torah. It was written in Eastern Europe by a man, but written almost exclusively for women. The women in Eastern Europe did not mostly know how to read Hebrew, but they could read Yiddish. And so it's a good commentary for us because it emphasized midrash and stories and stuff, things that, people that weren't too interested in the details of halacha might be interested in. So that's the Santa Rena. Okay, Marcia, you want to keep reading?
Okie dokie.
Have reached Joan inside. Please leave your name and number. We will.
Well, okay. Rabbi Jacob ben Isaac Ashkenazi of Yanov, author of Sanana Urehena, supports Plout's view, maintaining that the Arei Miklat are a means of containing the sin of murder. He writes that each murder, intentional or unintentional, banishes God's presence from the world because each human being is made in the image of God. When that image is destroyed, God's presence is sent into exile. By contrast, the high priest, through his saintly function in the sanctuary, brings God's presence into the world. This is why, explains Rabbi Jacob, the unintentional killer is confined to the city of asylum until the high priest dies. Those who diminish God's presence should not go into the world, should not contaminate it with their sin, while the high priest who labors to bring God's presence into the world is alive.
All right, anybody want to explain what he's saying?
Does that mean every death diminishes us in the world? Whether a murder or not, does every death, well, I guess it does diminish everything in the world.
Pam? Unmute.
Yeah, I can't figure this one out. Why the death of the high priest is the turning point on these.
Well, the high priest is sort of the symbol of communications with God. The high priest is the one that goes into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur to communicate directly with God. I mean, I guess they were just looking for a way to mark the end of an era. Anybody else have a Riva or Steve or Lael? Lael.
Well, if the high priest is the one who is absorbing his sin of murder because he's killed somebody, and that's a big sin. Once the priest dies, he's I mean, it would seem the end of his sentence, because he's the one that said, okay, you killed somebody, and now he's gone, and I get it. I get the impression that the high priest is absorbing this other guy's sin, and as long as the high priest is alive, the sin is alive. But once the high priest dies, then his sin is removed, so to speak.
I think she's right.
Pam, does that make any sense to you now?
It makes sense. It just doesn't sound very Jewish to me. I don't know.
That's another story.
Yeah, I'm kind of with Pam. I think it suggests that God is intervening at a granular level. And some of us may have that belief, but some of us do not. And it sounds a little bit like magical thinking to me.
Well, and granted, look at the source. The Center Rena is an Eastern European Yiddish commentary that was catering to the less educated elements of the community.
All the women.
Well, I didn't want to say that, but it obviously absorbed a lot of superstition, which is a very heavy element in pre-modern religion of all types, including and maybe especially, well, not especially, but including Judaism. So you're seeing a pre-modern superstitious Judaism that Pam and Riva don't really identify as Judaism, because they see Judaism as modern and rational and intellectual and advanced. And that's one kind of Judaism, but not all types. Bernie or Lael or Jennifer or Sai. Okay, let's keep going. Samson Raphael Hirsch is the founder of modern Orthodoxy in Germany.
Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch amplifies the point made by Rabbis Plaut and Jacob concerning the sacredness of life by emphasizing the special relationship between the people, the land of Israel, and God. He writes that the land is only given on the condition of every human life being respected and being unassailably sacred to the Torah. One drop of innocent blood shed and no notice taken of it drops a stitch in the bond that connects the land with the nation and both with God. Unlike Plaut and Jacob, Hirsch does not look upon the asylum cities as a place for the containment of those who contaminate the world through their sin of unintentional homicide. Instead, he sees them as providing opportunities, offering forgiveness and rebirth. Hirsch argues that just as when we are born, we are set in the world as a permanent surrounding, consigning the unintentional murderer to a Miklat city is similarly a second confining birth. The Miklat city is henceforth the whole world to the one who is relegated to it. According to Hirsch, this rebirth within the Miklat city is not a form of punishment, but a chance to find a life there. For that reason, says Hirsch, the town should be of medium size, not enclosed by a wall, provided with water and food markets. All national classes must be settled there. It must have teachers, students, people of science, of spiritual and intellectual quality. According to Jewish tradition, the students must be allowed to follow their teacher if he is guilty of unintentional murder, and a teacher must be given the freedom to follow a student.
All right, so we're talking here about a theory of rehabilitation for somebody who unintentionally kills somebody. If I unintentionally steal a candy bar, I'm in a supermarket and the candy bar falls in my pocket and I walk out, that's a relatively minor thing. But killing a person, even if totally unintentionally, even if it's not my fault at all, it's still a dramatic and horrible result. And so therefore it requires a process of rehabilitation. Comments? Leah?
I'm wondering if this is the way that they use it as a jail. There was no other place that they had a jail like we have in modern times.
Maybe you're
Well,
right.
it's that's a good point, and it's not really a jail in the sense that this person's not been convicted of any crime per se. It's sort of more moral culpability. You know, if my actions lead to the death of somebody, even if I didn't do anything really quote unquote wrong, I still have moral culpability, and there needs to be some process of tshuva, an extent. I mean, I guess that's what the implication is. Bernie, Lorraine, Riva, Jennifer, anybody else? Yes, Riva.
Yeah, this paragraph, at least for me, seems to be a perfect example of cut and paste that's done in these documents. And that is, it seems to be really out of time and place of all the rest of this, where we're talking about the quality of students, and I can't grab the stuff fast enough, but a lot of the points that are made just do not seem to be appropriate to that period.
Well, and Samson Raphael Hirsch is writing in the 19th century. So, you know, and of course, we that's a very good point. We have this problem. It's a problem or not a problem that things in the Torah can be, you kind of want him to talk about the Torah in the context of his time, but reading it here, it, as Riva says, doesn't fit at all. You know, like in the biblical times, following your teacher or students is not the primary thing. It's evading being killed by a rival tribe, that you've killed their, you know, member and they're going to kill you. You know, you're not so much worried about making sure that the city that you find refuge in has a good library, or strong Wi-Fi.
I'm curious as to whether you think that these rules and regulations are applicable to all of the people that live there rather than just the Israelis.
Yeah, no, I think it very well might, because the Torah elsewhere talks about strangers, non-citizens, and that in general they're given most of the rights of the native Israelis, if the Israelis are actually quote unquote native. So I would say that that there's nothing here to suggest that this would not apply to everybody. But the general impression from all of this is twofold. On one hand, there's a desire to protect a person who kills somebody by accident. On the other hand, that some of the commentaries seem to feel this person needs to be purified, either to keep them away from other people that they might defile, or to just help them to rehabilitate over the course of years. So it seems to go in two very opposite directions almost. Marcia.
Unmute.
Marcia, you have to unmute.
I'm wondering about the high priest's role in this, because did they not also have civil courts? Didn't they have courts that would is murder so grossly out of the realm of what their judges would do? Because they did have judges. We heard about this from previous parshas, that they would go to court for this or that. I guess now that I think about it, maybe murder is above and beyond what the lower courts could handle. They had to go to the high priest for this.
Well, in Judaism, there's no clear differentiation between civil law and religious law.
Oh.
So everything is basically handled in the same way. So, and here we have, this was a point I was planning to make at the very beginning, and then I did, that we have here what, in modern terminology would be a completely civil law, right? This is not an issue for the synagogue. If somebody's driving in our parking lot and runs somebody else over by mistake, we call the police, right? We don't take them to the rabbi. So it's completely civil law. But and then it becomes, if not criminal law, it becomes lawsuit, again, in a civil context. But in those days, it's all one thing. So, and you can see how it's mixed. The biblical authors and then later the rabbis aren't sure what to do with it. Like, we want to protect the person that caused the death, but on the other hand, there seems to be an ethical responsibility regardless. And that ethical responsibility has religious implications. Final comments, Lorraine, Pam, Bonnie, Babette. Steve.
Before we conclude and do the blessing, Riva has a couple of things she wants to mention, and then we'll get into the Torah blessings. Go ahead, Riva.
Thank you. I'll be very quick. I just want to mention that right now we're in Harvey Field's Volume 3, Number and Deuteronomy, and that either through Abe Books or Amazon, that particularly this volume is available for around $6 each. Many people in our class have had issues around getting, downloading the readings each week, or other issues around that sort of thing. And so I want to suggest, and I will follow up with an email to everybody on the blast list, what you can go through if you want to have your own copy of the individual volumes. And it was something I would really encourage, because many people over time have said, I couldn't read it this week, I couldn't download it, whatever the story is. I can easily provide everybody with the curriculum for the entire year, so you know what reading is being used for each week. And to those of you who have the time and can afford it, buy your own copy. I would strongly encourage you to do so. So just know that announcement is coming through within the next few days, and that if buying the individual volumes might be useful to you, I encourage you to do it. the price for all of these volumes varies enormously from $5 or $6 to 30 or 40 bucks. So you need to keep watching the used copies over time and get a really inexpensive volume. I've bought quite a few of them for myself and for some other people. And I find although the level of quality of the used books is listed as quite variable, even the ones that are just considered good, which is kind of next to the lowest level, have been just really clean and easy to read. So I think the vast majority of those that are being sold as used are usually in quite good condition.
Thank you, Reva.
You're welcome.
Any other final comments before we conclude?
Next week, we're starting the book of Deuteronomy, and we're going to talk about justice.
Okay. Let us conclude then with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Elohim melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam rabim. Baruch atah Adonai, Notei Torah. Blessed is Adonai our God, ruler of the universe. He has given us a teaching of truth, implanting within us eternal life. Blessed is Adonai our God, giver of the Torah. Amen.
Amen.
Have a great week, rest of the week. And,
Thank you.
Else later.
And,
Bye, everyone.
be well and have a great week, and I look forward to seeing everybody soon in person.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Rabbi.
Yes,
Yes.
welcome
Thank you,
back.
Lorraine. Thank you.
You're welcome. You had a good time, I presume?
I had a great time.
Good.
Even the bicycle falling was kind of an adventure.
That's not fun.
Stay well, stay cool.
Yeah, but it's an experience that you can remember for sure, right?
It makes you, otherwise I wouldn't have remembered it at all, you know.
Exactly.
I put some pictures up on my webpage.
I saw some of them already.
Great.
Awesome. Take care, everyone. See you soon.
Okay, bye.